Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing the social and economic impacts of Schedule II drugs. Specifically, we will be looking at oxycodone and amphetamines. Schedule II drugs are approved for medical use by the FDA and are considered the most addictive of the medically approved drugs. Before we jump into the impact of Schedule II drugs, there are some distinctions that need to be made regarding its organization. Schedule II drugs are sorted by 2 and 2N, the N standing for non-narcotic. Non-narcotic essentially means that it isn't an opioid. To further explain this difference, here are some examples. Schedule II drugs include opium, morphine, and hydrocodone. Schedule IIN drugs include dextroamphetamine, also known as Adderall, methamphetamine, also known as desoxyn, and methylphenidate, also known as Ritalin. Additionally, the terms opiate and opioid are commonly thrown around throughout this module, and it is important to understand the differences between these two drugs. To put it simply, the suffix ate is having the characteristics of. The suffix oid means resembling, like, or the similar form but not the same as. Opiates derive directly from an opium poppy, whereas opioids are not found in nature and are at least partly synthetic. Starting with Schedule II narcotics, let's take a closer look at the economic impact of oxycodone. Usage of oxycodone has grown rapidly over the past few decades. From 1999 to 2011, oxycodone use increased more than 5-fold. In 2016, it was estimated that OxyContin brought in an estimated revenue of $31 billion. To put this number into perspective, this is roughly the estimated value of the entire company Airbnb. Looking at graph 1, we can see that OxyContin has been growing rapidly at the beginning and plateaus in the 2010s. But what happens here in this 2005 to 2007 dip, you might ask? In 2007, the U.S. Justice Department concluded a criminal investigation into Purdue, the main manufacturer of OxyContin. The investigation centered around a marketing campaign launched by the company claiming that OxyContin was less addictive than other painkillers, which is misbranding. Purdue's 3 top executives pled guilty, and the company was fined $635 billion for downplaying the addiction risk of their product. To this day, this is only the 11th highest pharmaceutical settlement. In Figure 2, we can take a look at the distribution of oxycodone across the United States in grams. There is a generally consistent pattern regarding population of a state and amount of product. Some of the large numbers on the east side may be due to production plants. Purdue has production facilities in New Jersey, North Carolina, and Rhode Island. It would make sense why there is a high density of dark blue states in those regions. Additionally, the second densest state, Florida, with 4,832 grams per 10,000, makes sense because of the extremely high elderly population. Now looking at oxycodone's social impact, we can measure it by the people most impacted by the drug as well as trends that result due to its usage. Although several populations are impacted by oxycodone, 2 of the most important are pregnant women and prisoners. Pregnant women are commonly given oxycodone to deal with pain. In addition to addiction, a disease called neonatal abstinence syndrome, or NAS, may occur. This happens when a baby withdraws from certain drugs that they are exposed to in the womb before birth. From 2000 to 2012, the amount of neonates with NAS increased 5-fold. Additionally, people recently released from prison experience are at the highest risk of fatal opioid overdose more than any other subpopulation. So why is this? There are several factors that may lead to why this is, but one of the most important is low tolerance. Essentially, a prisoner will come out of prison and do the dosage that they were used to doing before they were locked up. Another important factor is that usually when a prisoner is fresh out, they are usually unemployed and poor. If we look at some of the trends in usage, the age group with the greatest past year non-medical use of opioids is young adults aged 18 to 25, yet the greatest use, i.e. exposure, of prescription opioids is among adults aged 26 and older. Roughly 80% of current heroin users reported that they began with prescription opioids. The national death rate from opioids has increased fourfold, but it's very difficult to account for this because heroin users and opioid users are not mutually exclusive. Taking a look at graph 3, we can see that overdosing doesn't discriminate based on gender. It's steadily increasing for both males and females, and therefore overall. Graph 4 shows that there is a direct relation between the sales, deaths, and treatment facilities. All are increasing, and increasing treatment hasn't caused any decreased death as of yet. And lastly, Graph 5 shows age-adjusted rates of death relating to prescription opioids and heroin. As opioid rates continue to climb, heroin rates are increasing even more. This shows that opioid addicts are trying heroin due to either increased cost or accessibility. To understand opioids in a more personable context, let's take a look at use versus dependence versus addiction. Let's look at a man named Tony. Tony is the star pitcher for his college baseball team, and one game tears a ligament in his elbow. After his surgery, he is prescribed 30 pills of Vicodin in order to help with the pain. He is instructed to take one tablet every 4 to 6 hours as needed. Usage, it would be Tony following proper instruction. He takes one Vicodin every 4 to 6 hours as needed and does not exceed 6 tablets a day. Tony eventually becomes completely healed, only using 24 of the 30 pills prescribed. Since Vicodin is on the FDA's flush list, he flushes the extra 6 left over. Dependence would be by Tony starting with following proper instruction, but believes he's building a tolerance. He starts to take 2 pills every 4 hours instead of 1. He runs out of his 30 prescribed pills. Tony angrily calls his doctor, telling them that they did not prescribe him enough. Tony eventually receives another 30 pills and continually takes them at higher doses. Tony now only feels pain relief when he takes 2 to 3 Vicodins. Addiction would be Tony taking 2 Vicodins per dosage, similar to the dependence example. However, now Tony exhibits changes in behavior that require his body to need Vicodin in order to feel normal. Tony begins sweating profusely, feeling nauseous, and even lashing out at his girlfriend and family when he doesn't have any Vicodin. His surgery has long healed. However, Tony continually begs his doctor for more Vicodin for the pain. When denied, Tony raids his girlfriend's medicine cabinet and takes any pain reliever that he can get his hands on. To cover the other side of Schedule II drugs, let's take a closer look at some of the non-narcotic Schedule II drugs, specifically amphetamines. Adderall, a combined amphetamine medication, has had consistent economic impact. Looking at Graph 6, we can see that sales have been growing rapidly every year and reached $9 billion as of 2012. If we take a look at Graph 7, we can see the estimated number of children who have ever had ADHD. So you might initially look at this graph and see that it's going up. In 2011 it peaks, and as of 2016 it's gone down. However, this is because of the way that they conducted their surveys. In 2016, they expanded the range to include 2 through 17-year-olds, as opposed to before where they were doing age 4 through 17. So now there are more children included in the survey to dilute the numbers. Without those numbers, it's safe to assume that 2016 would also show the exponential increase shown in 2003 through 2011. Of children aged 4 through 17, 7.8% ever had an ADHD diagnosis in 2003, and that rose to 11% in 2011. Another statistic worth noting is that 64% of children with ADHD are noted as having some sort of other mental, emotional, or behavioral disorder, kind of like anxiety or conduct issues. The social impact of amphetamines has increased as it is becoming a more popular treatment. In 2016, 16 million people over the age of 18 use a prescription stimulant. Additionally, an estimated 5 million people misuse them. 55% of total prescriptions in 2015 were to adults aged 20 or older. So you might think amphetamines is kind of like for high schoolers or college kids, but it shows that even people into their adulthood still use stimulants. Taking a look at Graph 8, it shows us the consumption of ADHD medication by nation. I went ahead and bolded the United States graph. We are the second highest in consumption. And if you look at our before rate in 1996, it's 2 times higher than the next closest before rate in Canada. Oddly enough, we aren't number one. That goes to Iceland. I would imagine Iceland is probably number one due to long days. It might be hard to regulate sleep and a circadian rhythm. It might not entirely be for educational deficiencies. The point being that most times in the United States, you're getting an ADHD medication or a stimulant in order to curb some sort of educational deficiency. And we are so close to rivaling Iceland, where they more use it for non-educational purposes. So let's look at another use versus dependence versus addiction example. Jeremiah is a 19-year-old student who is just prescribed 5 milligram pills of Ritalin after being diagnosed with ADHD. Use would be Jeremiah using his Ritalin appropriately. He takes his first pill 30 minutes before breakfast and 30 minutes before lunch. Dependence would be, over the course of a few months, Jeremiah's grades begin to slip due to the increasing difficulty of some of his classes. Jeremiah firmly believes this is only due to his ADHD. Jeremiah goes to his doctor and is given a higher dosage of 20 milligrams and begins taking the drug 3 times a day. Jeremiah believes that without the Ritalin, he would not be able to study or get any grade above a D. Jeremiah also begins drinking espresso alongside with his medication. Addiction would look like Jeremiah graduating college and not requiring his medication to the same extent. When Jeremiah begins his new job in the real world, he soon realizes that he can't properly and efficiently accomplish his work. On off day, Jeremiah still bombards his body with stimulants in order to stay motivated enough to get through the day. Jeremiah begins taking his medication again while supplementing coffee and energy drinks. Since Jeremiah goes through his medication too quickly, he begins selling some of his last couple Ritalin pills in order to purchase small amounts of cocaine to get him going on days which he is waiting for his next prescription. So, to summarize, the opioid industry is a vastly profitable industry that rakes in over $30 billion annually in the United States. The rates of heroin and opioid usage and deaths increase in connection with each other. Many opioid addicts begin using heroin as a cheaper alternative. Schedule IIN drugs, such as amphetamines, are also a profitable market that have been growing exponentially in both revenue and prescription rate.